Before you take my hand as I guide you through gaming's greatest, this video is sponsored by my patrons. Shoutouts to each and every beautiful person that's helped me improve my production value and general quality as much as I have. Link in the description to learn more and potentially join yourself? Maybe? Please? Get on with the show already? Okay. So you take one good look at my channel and a couple of things probably go through your mind, I'm sure. Some of these thoughts people will say to my face, resulting in me feeling flattered or resisting the urge to break down into tears. But more often than not, I'll have people approach me in regards to my undying affection for the Tales series, or Tales of as many formally refer to it as. And within that, the most frequent questions or conversations arise from people wanting to know what to expect from it as a whole, how a newcomer should approach this series, and of course, which game or games to start with. Heck, most of you regulars are probably here based off of me attempting to help you all with the latter especially. This time around, what do you say we cover all of our bases? A full beginner's guide, if you will. Some general advice, tips and tricks to squeeze out the max amount of enjoyment possible, and ending with what I feel are the best starting points to hop into it all as of this point in time. I don't know, there could be some kind of major shift in the franchise that changes and invalidates everything I say here, but you know what? We're just gonna go for it anyway. So sit back, relax, and grab yourself a refreshing glass of water, because this is my beginner's guide to Tales of. Before anything though, some context is in order. I mean, what even is Tales of? Well, first of all, we can go ahead and drop the formalities. This is the Tales series, or just Tales. Even Wikipedia agrees with me on this. Plus, I feel weird ending any sentence with the word of. Even though I, just did in this sentence. But anyway, the Tales series debuting back in 1995 with Tales of Phantasia on the Super Famicom is a fantasy role-playing series primarily made by Bandai Namco. I call them Bamco because, it's my channel and I can be as informal as I want. As you may have noticed, Phantasia debuted on the Super Famicom and not the Super Nintendo, or SNES like everyone else calls it. Because of course, this series started off exclusively in Japan. And you better get used to that Japan exclusivity if you plan on getting into this series. I'll say that much. Thankfully, it only took until the next entry, Tales of Destiny, for the Sony PlayStation in 1997 for the series to make its way over to North America. Europe would, have to wait a bit. While what is and isn't a mainline entry is kinda up for debate in some instances, these on screen are what I consider to be just that for Tales. Why these games in particular? Well, for one, while the mainline entries in the past were classified as mothership titles, these were just those. The developers themselves counted these as the bread and butter of the series, so I think that warrants them being called mainline entries today. And secondly, they best represent the series' action RPG identity associated with them. Many people view this series as the Final Fantasy of action RPGs, and that's easy to see why. If not for its popularity, then for the fact that it's an anthology series, where each main entry features its own world, cast, rules, and identity distinct from one another. Of course, this isn't always the case, like Exilia and Exilia 2 are obviously connected, and sometimes you'll have entries in the same world that are like a billion trillion years apart or something, but the basic stories being separate from one another is what I'm trying to get at. Meaning that you don't have to play Eternia to understand Vesperia, for example. Even still, you shouldn't ignore the older titles completely. This series loves to give non-intrusive fan service as a way to celebrate itself and give its more die-hard audience a nice little thanks for playing in either subtle or blatant ways that are a lot of fun. This series in general is a lot of fun, but it can also be depressing, emotional, or frustrating, all of which, more often than not, for the right reasons. And just about all of these derive from the enormous cast of characters. Tales, in a way, is its characters. Despite how freaking many there are, you will remember everyone in the main casts that you come across, I promise you. And I find this to be one of the best aspects of the series as a whole, how much of it leans on its goal to make you open your heart to these varying personalities. Almost every entry features character-driven stories, for instance. Berseria is a revenge quest, Symphonia deconstructs the Chosen One archetype, and Abyss, a later rendition of its main theme is called Meaning of Birth, so there you go. Lots of time is focused on developing the cast in ways other series almost shy away from. You become so incredibly intimate with everyone, almost to an uncomfortable degree, which goes double for the many side quests each game features, and the literal thousands of skits. These are a series staple, being optional conversations of the characters either talking about recent story events or having random ass conversations that wouldn't fit otherwise. And all of this focus on the characters becomes reinforced through gameplay, as each character forges their own distinct fighting style and move kit over the course of their games. Holding off on getting too much into the gameplay though, I want to make note that that the actual plots of these Tales games are pretty solid, regardless of the clear focus on the casts. Like, with me quickly bringing up what Berseria, Symphonia, and Abyss are trying to convey, I could reasonably have people come up to me with different takeaways since there are a lot of themes and messages per entry. Going back to Berseria, it's not just about revenge, but also about will versus reason, redemption, blind faith, what it means to live. Such heavy talking points, all handled tactfully. It's truly amazing how much you could take away from just one playthrough of a single entry. And you've got a whole series full of games worth replaying if not for re-experiencing the story, trying out new characters, or completing some side quests you might have missed, than just for the sake of coming back to a game or series so easy to fall in love with. And yes, I would encourage replaying Tales entries should you feel even an ounce of a desire to do so. The Tales series handles New Game Plus better than just about any other RPG I've played, for how much it allows you to customize future playthroughs to your exact liking, more often than not as a reward for learning the game's combat and getting better at all it's trying to do. Uber powerful God mode runs where you just blast through the game, sure, go for it. But you can also do some low level runs or even go for the hardest difficulty usually locked behind a New Game Plus file. This is also the point where I'd recommend using a guide for hunting down side quests, because most of the time these are incredibly hard, nigh impossible to find out about on your own. More recent entries are a lot better with this, but with the likes of Symphonia, Abyss, and especially Vesperia, just to throw some names out, there would be little to no indication on where the side quests were, how to get to them, and how to continue ones that were split up into multiple parts. Many people consider this a problem with the series, but they're optional. Yes, I know that you can get a lot of cool rewards for doing them, but I feel like people only consider this an issue because they find out what cool rewards there are and get mad that they missed out on them. These are here for replay value, for discovering something new in future playthroughs. And I know we live in a world where replay value is a lost art, and people don't feel like playing the same game twice because everyone has hundreds and thousands of games in their backlog for some reason. But it's really not that bad, just get over it. You really want to play dress up with some unlockable costumes? Then play the game again. Sorry. With that being said, I highly encourage that you play each and every game blind for the first time. Stumble upon some side quests? Cool, do them if you feel like it. But waiting until a second playthrough and just going ham on them will not only make subsequent playthroughs more interesting and a lot more fresh, but this will help you like the game even more. Because odds are that if you're playing it again, you probably liked it already the first time through. But discovering all of the secrets, getting more characterization out of these fleshed out casts, and watching combat somehow open up even more is an indescribable feeling of euphoria that you just can't ruin for yourself. Also, some guides may spoil you on twists since many story events act as thresholds for opening and closing various quests, so you know, there's that too. And not just in future playthroughs, but your first one as well, don't shy away from playing as the other characters. Tales games make their main characters the easiest to get into, as I believe they should be. But you'd be surprised as to how much fun you can have with almost everyone in every entry. This goes double for Grace's Onward, as they went ham on differentiating the characters a lot more, to the point where they'll sometimes force you to play as someone other than the protagonist. But don't sleep on the casts prior to these entries. Everyone has as in-depth an arts and skills pool as your main dude, so if combat feels like it's starting to get a bit samey, change things up. By the time you've made your rounds and are back to the main character, odds are that the game will have introduced some new general mechanic to keep things fresh all over again. And besides, you want to make sure you let your friends know who the real fun ones are to play as, because get this, almost every entry is up to 4 players. Yeah, couch co-op, you remember this? Unfortunately, as of now, it's limited to just that, couch co-op. No online play or anything, but if in these crazy times and beyond you're able to make contact with some friends or family and feel like playing something, going through a journey like a Tales game together is a great way to strengthen those connections even further. I highly recommend taking advantage of the opportunity should it come up. I know RPGs can get a little daunting in regards to keeping up with equipment, numbers, and stats for a bunch of characters at once, so here's my advice. Just put your main focus on learning the combat system. I believe Tales is as much about its characters as it is about skill mastery. Being action RPGs, you're the one in control. When an enemy swings their sword at you, you're the one responsible for dodging, not some evasion or accuracy stat. So if you want to come out of these games on top, you have to put in the effort to learn the mechanics, appreciate them, and in some cases, master them. The latter especially if you want to go for the harder optional post-game content. This is where most of your attention should go, so you can get away with skipping a few towns with their new equipment without making the game feel extra spicy akin to some kind of self-imposed rule set. A Alongside this though, you want to at least keep up with these games' skill systems, as more often than not, they're the backbone of the combat. Figure out how they work in each entry and use them to your advantage. Not to mention, these are what help to differentiate party members and help them fulfill their roles better. So with this knowledge and a little bit of party composition experimentation, the games hopefully shouldn't be too overwhelming, and if they ever are, don't forget that you can always change the difficulty in the options at any point in any playthrough. There's no shame, and the games don't force you to commit to one the entire way through. Raise it whenever you want, lower it whenever you want, just do what you need to have fun. Something very easy to do with how inherently well designed these games are from what I just laid out for you all. This is the general information and advice I'd give for the series as a whole, so I really hope it helps. But now, we get into the fun part. So out of all of these mainline entries, what makes the best starting point? Before that though, let's lay out where you shouldn't start, and try to remember, just because I don't find the following games to be great first time entries, does not mean that I dislike them. With my recommendations, I'm keeping in mind accessibility not just in regards to what systems they're on, but language accessibility as well, because let's be real, with how game preservation has been neglected as of late, emulation is more or less the future. So long as a game's in at least English, since odds are if you're watching this video you understand the language, then it's fair game. Other than that, I'll lay out why I feel some games are and aren't great starting points on a case-by-case basis. So with all that being said, don't start off with these because they don't have an official translation. Playing with an online guide is possible for some of these, but splitting your attention between the game and the guide can get kind of frustrating, especially with the added variables that can stem from your particular playthrough, like wanting to talk to NPCs, navigating through the menus, the story potentially branching off depending on some actions you take. It's a lot, and this limits the ways in which you can play these games, which are meant to be played in your own fashion more than once. Now, some of these have fan translations, so if you can get those figured out, then by all means have at it. But even still, out of these games I singled out, I personally don't consider these good starting points anyway, in all of their forms of release at that. The 2D games are best saved for later. Innocence R has no translation, whether that be fan-made or official, and Hearts R, I'd also avoid the older 2D entries, as they show their age in many areas and don't exactly represent what the series has become today. If you absolutely have to start with the 2D games, at least start with Eternia, since out of the 3 originals, that one feels the most modern in terms of its gameplay, therefore is the easiest to get into, and you can decide from there whether to continue your 2D journey or just go into 3D. Symphonia is a good next step for the latter after that, I'd say. Oh, and especially keep your distance from Phantasia on the GBA. Imagine trying to cram a SNES and PlayStation RPG onto this little thing. Ugh. Don't start with the sequels because you won't understand the story and or will get the game preceding them spoiled rotten, which is no fun. Yes, I know I constantly drool over Exilia 2 and how it's a misunderstood work of art, but it can wait. Don't start with Legendia because it's too different from the rest of the series and thus could set you up for expecting something entirely different than what this series sets out to be. And finally, don't start with Zestiria or Berseria. They're the newest ones and they make it a lot harder to come back to older entries, even Graces, which features a battle system these games attempted to build off of. And if you have, you don't have to comment saying that you did or that I'm too late or whatever, because to put it in the nicest way possible, I literally could not care less. What we're left with are some great starting points for the reasons you see on screen right now. Symphonia, Abyss, Vesperia, Graces, and Exilia are what you want to keep your eyes on, whether you have the systems they were released on or get enough PC. But out of these, the 2 I'd say are the cream of the crop in terms of getting newbies into the series are Vesperia and especially Exilia. Putting aside that I believe Tales of Vesperia to be the best game ever made, this is just about everything a good entry in the series should. A god tier cast, an incredibly character driven tale, hundreds of skits that range from commenting on past story events to even the most minuscule topics, a timeless art style, way too much content, all accessible in-game and not behind some overpriced DLC, and a sky-high skill ceiling. Matter of fact, I believe Vesperia has the highest skill ceiling out of any entry. Sure, if you play the game normally, you can have a good time. Again, just rotate through the cast, try and figure out different characters' playstyles, and keep up with skills. Pro tip, when the skill is green, that means it's activated. But if you put in the time to learn some of the more advanced techs and mechanics, Vesperia almost becomes an entirely different game. It's at least the one that encourages single character combos more so than any other entry, to the point where you can even equip skills that remove other teammates to truly lab some different combinations. Vesperia feels most like its combat system is a straight up fighting game, meaning that it has a sharp learning curve if you want to take the extra step, but fellas, the feeling you get when you master Vesperia has yet to be matched out of any game I've ever played. Like I said, it's my favorite, let alone my favorite combat system out of any RPG, and that alone has made it endlessly replayable. But that aside, why there's just so much to do. So many corners of the world go unexplored if you simply progress through the main story in a linear fashion. There are so many freaking skills, and how they're handled in this game engages you in a way no other entry matches if you were to ask me. And while some may disagree on the direction the story takes in the later parts, for most of your time spent here, you have one of the most thought-provoking narratives all centering around one big question. What is true justice? With so much to do, so many great callbacks to older titles, secrets to uncover, and a combat system that is Tales in its most polished, but in a way that forces you to take the initiative and discover it all, this is an excellent first step into the series. Plus it's on like everything now with its definitive edition, all of which constantly going on sale. Accessibility is not an issue whatsoever. If you end up liking Vesperia and want to keep playing more, I would personally recommend going backwards into the series. So once you're done with it, Abyss is a good next step, followed by Symphonia, and if you want to play the older 2D titles along with Legendia, playing them after Symphonia would be the best time, since I'd almost describe that game as a 2D Tales on a 3D plane. Keep in mind that while Symphonia and especially Abyss have almost the same skill floor, their skill ceiling doesn't nearly reach the heights that Vesperia does. So that may sour your feelings on those games a little bit, but go into them with the mindset that they're just stricter, not necessarily limited. At least with Symphonia anyway, since that game feels more designed around its limitations than Abyss. But anytime I say something remotely negative about that game, people get on my ass, so let's just stay away from that for today. Now as for Exilia, yes, it's only been officially released on PS3, but again, let's be real, game companies don't care about preserving their games, so do what you need in order to experience what I believe is a fantastic entry in the series, having a great story and my second favorite cast right behind Vesperia. And the game allows for you to fall in love with them on that deeper level I explained subsequent playthroughs would, as side quests are much easier to get in this game, especially with it hinting at the player revisiting areas in order to trigger them through skits and keeping a great track of them in the pause menu. That's some good stuff right there. It doesn't tell you about every single quest, leaving you to discover some of them on your own in future playthroughs, so it's kind of the best of both worlds, and I like this approach a lot. As for combat, it hits that sweet spot between Vesperia and the games preceding it and Grace's Beyond, having a combination of the former game's TP and the latter game's CC, or in this game's case, AC. The general speed of the game is one of the highest in the series, engaging you based off of that alone, but still having the depth that the best of these games provide. This was also developed after Grace's, so like I said, we're at the point in time where the entire party had a lot of thought put into them in terms of their fighting styles, so I'd say everyone's a blast to play as, even if you aren't too accustomed to the combat system. There are a couple of quirks to keep in mind though. For one, this game's kinda easy. One of the easiest for sure, right alongside Abyss in that regard. So I'd say at the very least, play this game on moderate, the in-between for normal and hard, and if that's still a bit too easy, then just crank it up to hard. Secondly though, and most importantly, you may have noticed at the start of your playthrough that this game is split into two different story perspectives, one for Jude and the other for Mila. Once you choose who your protagonist is, you have to commit to that for the entirety of the playthrough, so it's a really big choice right off the bat. If you take anything away from this video, make it this: your first Exilia playthrough, pick Jude. While the general story is the same for both, Jude undeniably features the most important story beats when he and Mila occasionally split up. It's to the point where one part of the game has Jude go through literally the peak of the story, and Mila go through one of the lamer parts. Not to say Mila's story is bad or anything, far from it, but it feels like it was written to be played as a New Game Plus route, as some revelations are revealed in ways where it feels like the game expects the player to have information they normally wouldn't if it was their first time through. Not to mention Mila's story focuses too much on, well, Mila. She's a great character, but this is a disservice to the phenomenal cast as a whole and their personal journeys they go through, those of which better represented from Jude's perspective. So again, if you're playing Exilia for the first time, please pick Jude. New Game Plus though, switch over to Mila, because this adds yet another layer of replayability on subsequent playthroughs. Exilia generally feels like the safest bet on whether or not someone will like it, as it has a lot of subtle design choices to make it newcomer friendly, like the relatively lower difficulty, more in-your-face character growth, a straightforward skill system that's tied to leveling up, and it's fairly short. I mean, I say short when it's a little less than the 40-hour norm this series provides, but still, all of these add up to making it what I consider to be the best starting point in the series, at least on par with Vesperia. If you end up enjoying this game, you can either go to Vesperia and backwards from there, or to Grace's and in order of release, since again, it takes cues from both ends of the series. And when you're done with one side of the spectrum, heading back to Exilia 2 would make a nice transition for the other side. So for example, say you played Exilia then went to Grace's, Zestiria, and Berseria. Go back to Exilia 2 before heading to Vesperia and further back so that the classic linear motion battle system becomes familiar yet again. Also, Exilia 2 acts as a great test of skills, since I consider it one of the harder entries, and, you know, it's really good, and anyone who doesn't enjoy like I do simply doesn't know how to digest good video games. But anywho, whew, I think that's about everything. Quite the extensive guide, wouldn't you say? Please say it was, I worked really hard on this. Just wanted to make sure all of my bases were covered this time around. If you have any more questions, meet me in the comments. I read them all and would be more than happy to help you get into this amazing franchise, and I'm sure many others would as well. I'm hoping we forge some great friendly conversations with this video acting as the catalyst. Tales games are great, they really are, and I hope that those of you who are interested have a great time if you eventually make that jump. There's nothing quite like the more personal, intimate quests these games provide, with them potentially rising in scope of course, but never losing sight of the heart of these games, the characters and your skill which helped you reach the end. All in all, I've said it a million times, but I'm gonna go ahead and make it 1,000,001. I freaking love these games, and I'm jealous of anyone getting to experience them in future entries for the first time. You will hopefully be in for some unforgettable stories, unforgettable journeys, unforgettable tales. Special thanks yet again to @NeoArts for the gorgeous thumbnail art. Her Twitter account will be linked in the description. If you haven't commissioned her yet, literally, what are you doing? And of course, major shoutouts to all of my patrons who help me monetarily, specifically the $10 Mystic artists, who go by the names of First Lieutenant Noguchi, Capone Ardolane, Floragrar, Kiara Loveday, Mecha, Neolab, Noah Ignis, Steve Appleman, and Xenolith. Much love and a kiss on the cheek to all of my $2 base artists and $5 burst artists, who are listed on screen right now. To have your name in my videos, therefore making your mark on the internet forever, click the link in the description for more information on my Patreon, the different tiers, and benefits that follow. The $10 patrons got this video months in advance and have a bunch to watch right now, so you know, I'm just saying. If all of that's too much trouble, just drop me a like, it really helps. However you choose to support the channel, or not, thank you for simply watching the video. It really means the world to me. I wish you all could comprehend how hard I work on these. Thank you for sticking around to the end. It's an incredible feeling. And so long as you stay hydrated, I'll see you all in whatever we do next.